Ubisoft has basically become notorious for releasing games that are either unfinished and broken or overdeveloped and bloated. More often than not, both of these at the same time. That's not to say that they're all bad games. Some of these games have been incredible and genre defining, but there's almost always something that just stops these games from being perfect or reaching their full potential. There's one game in particular that I think is maybe the most Ubisoft of Ubisoft games, and we're going to try and find out why it was good, but not quite great. Wildlands has a fairly simple premise. You're part of a specialist team hired by the US government to put an end to a Bolivian drug cartel that has grown to the size of a small government, complete with a private military. The gameplay mostly focuses on tactical squad-based stealth shooter mechanics, where most of the time the idea is to try and complete missions and take out enemies without being spotted or having your position given away, but with the freedom to approach scenarios however you want. It has the trademark massive open world and overarching campaign, with missions scattered about which you can complete in any order, as well as a ton of side content. The game's major strength is honestly its core gameplay. When it's good, it's really good. Wildlands has a huge emphasis on player freedom, giving you the choice of what to do and how you want to do it. If you want to drive an armoured car straight into an outpost and blow away all the enemies with explosives and heavy ordnance, you can do that. Or you can quietly infiltrate in the dead of night with silenced low caliber weapons and try to remain unnoticed. The choice really is yours. The mechanics of the game tend to lean slightly more towards a stealthy approach, and this is also generally more immersive and challenging. It means every single decision you have to make and every bullet shot in the game matters, and for the most part generally makes you feel like an agent deep in the Bolivian underworld. The gunplay and weapons also have this sense of realism that isn't often found in other games without it feeling also a little overcomplicated. Landing critical long-range headshots in this game are also incredibly satisfying and much more difficult to pull off than just having your crosshair over the enemy's head, due to the bullet travel and drop which is exceedingly pronounced in this game. You have to choose your moment and use controlled single shots or short bursts, as sustained fire recoil is incredibly difficult to control. The enemies in Wildlands also have the generic game spotting mechanics, which scale with difficulty, but there's not really much more that's needed if you're able to get these mechanics right. You can also spot and track enemies using your gun sights or a deployable drone, which is another really good mechanic that allows you to keep track of enemy behaviour and positioning. The playable world itself is the game's other major strength. Bolivia is an excellent setting for this game. It allows for a massive range in landscapes, so there's plenty of variance in different areas of the map that feel unique. The world itself is also huge, and all of it is accessible and playable at any point, though different areas have different difficulty ratings and levels of resistance. It's an awesome sandbox to get stuck into and mess around with friends in, or to explore on your own. On a smaller scale, the different outposts, villages and camps are all designed to have several different ways to breach and clear, giving you options of how to approach each one. They're all different in layout and design depending on their location in the map and difficulty for that area. They also have different paths and vertical levels, so you can find different routes through each one. You can sneak through the different components to complete the mission directive without alerting anyone, for example, or get to high ground and clear out enemies from afar. It's also just stunningly beautiful from pretty much any angle. Ubisoft's art department are on full flex here, with realistic looking game models and a lot of hidden detail, as well as rich open vistas and landscapes that wouldn't look out of place as someone's wallpaper. There's so much life put into the details of this world that it's one of the more aesthetic and immersive game worlds that I've ever experienced. Every time you think the game has reached its peak visually, it will just slap you in the face with something else that will take your breath away. It's also really technically impressive, with high dynamic and immersive lighting, explosions and weather effects, even for a 4-year-old game. The rest of the presentation is of really high standard, which actually isn't that uncommon for Ubisoft games, and it looks and sounds fantastic. It isn't just the world of Bolivia that has been presented in a beautiful way, with stunning vistas and bustling villages, but all of the weapons, vehicles and equipment also all look great and have a lot of care put into their designs. Although I have to say, while it runs impressively well on consoles, it is a beast to run on PC, and you won't be running this at high refresh rates without massively pulling back your settings. The music isn't also anything to write home about, but it plays its role well and adds a certain level of immersion and personality to parts of the game. However, the sound design and mixing is actually really very good.
Ready, call the shot. We're cool, he's dead.
This is usually something that goes completely under the radar in games, and most players may not even notice, but the sounds of your shots, equipment and movement, and pretty much everything else all sound great, and ambient sounds like chatter, vehicles and all the weather really contribute to a high level of immersion. It's not a new premise, but Wildlands pulls together one of the better examples of how to do this type of game, and its core gameplay is highly immersive and enjoyable. When you take all of these core factors and allow your friends to join in for up to a squad of 4, this formula creates some seriously fun moments and scenarios that are pretty unique to this game, and probably the best way to play any action stealth shooter at all.
Cool, I'm opening fire now.
Copy.
So, why is it not great? It's quite clear that in the case of Wildlands, there has been a lot sacrificed for the world and for the freedom within it, but it really didn't have to be. Firstly, while the map is massive and varied, it's just too big and sparsely populated, making the playable world just feel kind of empty, and missions and points of interest just kind of take too long to get between. It could honestly be decreased by about a third, and it would improve the game immensely as the entire map would feel more alive, and as though there's more going on in the world, instead of a lot of big, open, pointless areas. There's also just too many things to do and, well, not enough reason to do them. The plot in this game is paper thin and very stretched out. It has been constructed in a way that so you can go about doing the missions in pretty much any order to progress, which on paper sounds really good, and fits the type of exploration and gameplay this world is begging for. But its execution and implementation basically just mean that none of the missions feel like they have any importance, as they seemingly have no tangible effect on the game, and are fairly forgettable. For example, when you complete or unlock certain missions, you're sent a file which you have to access through the game map. These are really high quality and nicely edited videos, which explain either why it's so important that you take down the person who is the focus of the video, or a congratulations on doing so and a look into how it's affected the cartel's operations. Despite these videos being captivating and high quality themselves, this is kind of the lowest form of storytelling and such a waste of potential. It actually does make sense to use these videos to brief players on what their task is and why it's important, and like I've said, the videos themselves are actually really good, but most players won't even notice them popping up, and most likely won't go searching through the map to find them. I understand it is this way because the developers don't want to break up the action, and it allows you to go directly from objective to objective without interruption, particularly when playing online. But the mission briefings could have had more impact and be implemented in a way that makes them more integral to the game, and there just doesn't need to be 500 of them. The bigger issue is that none of what you do or any of the missions seem to have any lasting impact on the game's world. You get a video saying good job, and that's it. This is where an opportunity to show and not tell the player would have been perfect, where you could have seen the world and characters react to your achievements and changes in the story. Instead, the best you get is occasional pieces of dialogue telling you that something you've done has had consequences.
One of those prisoners you set free from duty, Hipólito, was my brother Julián. I did not even know if he was alive or dead. Muchas gracias.
I am so fucking happy you made fucking Unidad fight fucking Santa Blanca, you know? It's about time General Barra and those culeros fought for Bolivia.
Old cartel outposts could have been turned into hospitals, schools or refugee sites, or at the very least could be rebel controlled now, with fights breaking out between the cartel and the rebels over territory. Instead, they either remain dormant, or the enemies just respawn in the same place as they were, ready for you to do it all over again. There's also no choices or any doubt in this game. You're doing what you're told all the time, and it's also always the right thing. What would have been really great is as you get closer to destabilizing the cartel, you would have to make some tough decisions about how things go down and who fills the power vacuum created, or do some things that make you question whether you're doing the right thing at all. The game occasionally hints at something like this, where, for example, at one point you drive a cartel member to suicide, and your squad mates comment on your involvement, but it's quickly just resolved as the guy having made his own choice. The game does have some other questionable moments, but it never really throws any real punches. I'm not saying Ubisoft has to have you commit literal war crimes in order to make the game interesting, but being right all the time does get a little bit stale. Instead, the game kind of just stays one-dimensional, with cartel bad and rebels good, whereas the lines could have crossed a little more during the story to make the game more interesting. The mission structure in this game is mostly also the same. Go into a fortified area without being detected or killed, and either secure some intel or take out a target. Some of the missions are really fun and have unique elements, but as is the theme of this game, there's just too many. Not only are a lot of them similar, but you also have to first perform a recon mission to unlock each one, which just dilutes the actual mission content so much more. Now this isn't necessarily bad. I can usually deal with repetitive tasks in a game if I'm given an in-game reason to do it, such as story or competing for score, but Wildlands doesn't really offer anything in this respect. Far Cry 3 was another game developed by Ubisoft that came out 9 years ago and has far more personality and plot, with compelling characters and motivations and an actual driving force to complete objectives. And although that game has its own issues, it does show you that you don't need to entirely gut the narrative, characters or any emotional elements in the game in order to have freedom. Aside from this, some missions in Wildlands are just ridiculously frustrating. The freedom and dynamic nature of the world means that almost anything can happen during missions, which is both good and bad. Good, because it can mean that two similar missions actually end up playing out rather differently. Bad, because it occasionally means you're just met with issues outside of your control, that I like to refer to as bullshit. For example, there's this one mission where you have to escort someone safely to an airport, but you're unable to get into the car with them. So you just have to watch while they moronically and aggravatingly drive their car straight into enemies and explode over and over and over again until the one time it goes right. Also, generally anytime you have to do anything involving a convoy or vehicles is just the worst. You'll either go in too hard and accidentally destroy whatever it was you needed to collect, or not hard enough and they'll just drive off out of there, quite often directly through you. There's almost always some kind of issue whenever I take on one of these missions. To be honest, the game is entirely carried by the core gameplay and the guns, but even then it has some issues, namely, there's just too many guns and unlocks. Being able to customize your loadout, which includes 2 main guns, a sidearm, equipment and a drone, on the fly at any time, is great and necessary to keep the gameplay fluid in such a large open world. This means that if you see an opportunity to play a scenario in a certain way, you're able to change your loadout to match this. The problem comes when there's just too many guns and not enough variety, and it begins to get a little overwhelming. There are so many weapons with overlapping properties that it diminishes the characteristics of those weapons and makes them feel a lot less memorable and unique. I can't tell you what my favourite DMR or SMG is in this game because I've just used too many and so many of them are so similar. Wildlands could have massively benefited from a system like there is in Modern Warfare, with fewer weapons but a much more detailed and intrinsic method of upgrading those weapons. Aside from there being too many, at least the guns in this game feel fantastic to use. On the other hand, your AI squad mates are, in my experience, more of a hindrance and immersion breaking than they are beneficial, and probably my least favourite thing in this game. They're extremely bland and lacking in any personality traits, and rarely have anything of value to say except world building exposition, which is the absolute bare minimum for dialogue. The only times I've found them useful are for when they occasionally point out where enemies are or revive me when I'm downed. But for the most part, I can still find all the enemies with my drone without issues, and they often end up chattering over things that I'm trying to listen out for, or get me killed. They're totally rubbish in combat too. They don't hit anything unless you use the really overhyped sync shot feature, which is honestly too much of a faff and has too much of a cooldown to ever really be useful, when you can just take 2 shots. The game is vastly improved by having actual player squad mates with you.
Yeah, I've got eyes. Tango down.
As being able to discuss strategy, calling out enemy positions and executing enemies from different angles is all good and fun with your friends, but this isn't surprising.
Got eyes on the other heavy, he's in this doorway.
Probably clean to take him.
Down.
Love that about you.
I also think that instead of balancing the game around having a squad of 4, the game would benefit far more from a focus on working as a duo, as this is how I've spent most of the game anyway. In online play, it's much easier to try to communicate and work out strategies on the fly with one other person than it is as a group of 4. I'm not saying that you should be limited to only being allowed to play with 2 players. You should still be able to go up to 4 if you have friends to play with, but 2 is optimal and should be encouraged.
Right, there's no alarm. If we can get these guys dead, then...
Yep, down.
In single player mode though, it should absolutely be a duo experience. This way you could place your partner into a beneficial position to spot enemies for you or cause distractions, instead of having a group of brain dead squad mates bumbling through a level alongside you. Not only is it easier and more straightforward to try and control one other AI player than 3 others, but more importantly, you'll be able to build up a character and relationship far more easily and naturally this way. It should be that playing as a group of players is encouraged and beneficial instead of basically essential, as your AI teammates do very little to help you when playing solo except to further frustrate you and chastise you in game.
You gonna execute him because he hurt your feelings?
Most of the time when playing offline, I'd rather play completely solo than have any AI teammates with me. They're that terrible. And on top of everything else, well, the difficulty scaling is it's kind of rubbish. Firstly, the way your character levels up and progresses should have been a key part of this game, but the implementation is poor. There are several skills that are completely essential to unlock, such as increasing your weapon accuracy or your bullet resistance, to the point where the game is virtually impossible to play without them. On the other end of the scale, some unlocks are completely unnecessary and basically useless, having only seemingly been added to pad out the playtime and give you things to do, and about 40% of unlocks could honestly have been trimmed for a more succinct player experience. The system is so intrusive that you pretty much have to stop playing the main game only a short way in to go and grind resources in order to be able to actually approach missions without feeling weak and underpowered. You'll also need to continue gathering these resources and grind for them throughout the rest of the game, and it kinda destroys the pacing and the immersion. As for the actual difficulty, I quite like challenging games, and will often try and play the game at the highest difficulty available, but if you raise the difficulty of Wildlands, it serves only to make the experience more tedious. You'll start getting spotted through walls, one-shotted from unknown enemies, and people you shoot at will just start matrix dodging your bullets. The game just doesn't appear to have been designed around these mechanics, and it isn't balanced. The game also starts to remove mechanics such as the minimap warnings for enemy players and grenade markers, which make the game feel more realistic and might favour some players, but it feels problematic to me. Some of the arcade-like elements that have been mixed in with a tactical stealth shooter have made this game very digestible and fun. Removing these mechanics slows down the pace of the game even more so, and for some players it will just end up as removing part of that fun. It also causes a huge imbalance in online modes, where if you're a player in a higher tier mode or difficulty and you're playing with others who aren't, you'll end up looking completely incompetent, as you're spotted more easily, take more damage, and have a majority of your useful game mechanics taken away from you, so you'll be constantly needing help. The game itself can just be a frustrating experience at times, and turning up the difficulty often just results in adding to that frustration. I understand that in Wildlands, the story has been sacrificed in order for freedom, and for the world itself, but it just doesn't provide you with enough in its stead, and it also seemingly didn't need to be, as the world and the gameplay would still work with a much more structured narrative and actual in-game choices and consequences. It's also kind of void of any personality or emotionality, and it definitely doesn't have to be, especially if you compare this game to entries in the Far Cry franchise, which, for all of its flaws, at least try to make you feel something. The best that Wildlands does to make you feel anything is to shock you or make you laugh with some of the outrageous cartel members' stories, which are excellent but easily missed and should have been implemented in a better way. The gameplay loop is also virtually non-existent, as in there is no loop. The actual fun gameplay is so broken up with bloated content, grinding for resources, travelling, and loading screens, that 1 moment in 10 is actually basically playing the game. However, I've got to say that Wildlands is not at all a bad game. The reason I've been so scathing is because the good parts in this game are really good, but there's just so many small issues. It's one of the most fun gameplay experiences you can have with a group of friends, and its core gameplay is just so satisfying that I can load it up to clear out a few outposts and then drop it again. But that's the issue, there's not that much that keeps you wanting to play, and it's a real shame, because had there been a few changes to the game, it would have been a far more enjoyable and succinct experience, and it would have been easy to recommend to just about anyone. As it stands, I still enjoy this game and I would recommend it to people, but only if they want something to mess around on with friends, as this is really how the game is supposed to be played. The phrase that really summarises the experience of this game is missed opportunity. The first 10 hours and the last 10 hours of the game are incredible, but there's 20 hours of mediocrity in between, and it's up to you and your friends to make the game fun. And that's really why Ghost Recon Wildlands is good, but it's not quite great.
Oh! Whoa! What's that doing? Get him right now! What is going on?
Is this your doing?
Me?
Well, I'm gonna get spotted here. Move. This guy's just asleep on the floor and there's
Hang on,
two
what's that?
beds next to him.
What's that?
That's what you get. Well, I just stomped between his legs and he died.
Isn't it an APC, so it's not even going under the water?
Yeah, we're doing it. No.
Oh, you sure? Oh no! I found the sub! I went to join yours and I carjacked someone. Thanks, game.
Well,
Oh, and
I'd be better off. But you know what? Let's just get the car at the end.